Welcome to the desktop mapping tutorial. First, some terms. What is an entity? Entities are observations of real-life people, places, things, and organizations in your data sources. Pro tip. Entity resolution works best when records contain a name and at least one additional feature such as an address, phone number, email, date of birth, or an identifier like a passport or driver's license number. The more features on each record, the better the entity resolution. Entities, features, and their attributes. An entity, like a person entity, has features in data like a name, a birth date, an address, and a cell phone number, to name a few. These are all examples of features. Within a given feature, like an address, for example, there are attributes which compose that feature, like city, state, and zip, in the case of an address. What is a label? Labels are used to keep features of the same type distinct. So in this case, where we have two addresses, home and work, we assign the appropriate labels, one for work and one for home, to the individual attributes of the feature. Now let's map in the app. Let's begin by adding a data source. In the case of this data source, Senzing auto mapping already grabbed and appropriately mapped the correct attribute to the appropriate feature based on the column header name. In the case where your column header name confounds auto mapping, you'll need to do some manual mapping activity. I'm going to carry us through a few common errors. Before we begin, let's review some concepts. An entity, like a person or a company, is composed of features like names, dates of birth, and addresses, as well as phone numbers or other unique identifiers, to name a few. Within any given feature, there are attributes which may be found in one or more columns in the data source. For example, in the case of name, we have a last name and a first name and a middle name. These are attributes of the name feature. And so you'll see that we have them mapped to the appropriate attribute, name last to the name feature, name first, and so on. The same is also true for addresses and phone numbers. Let's review some common issues that are often found in data sources that were not auto-mapped. In this case, a feature is missing a necessary attribute. So looking again at name, we see that last name has been left out. For example, the column header name may have been something other than what auto mapping would have recognized, and we need to go ahead and include that, map it to name, and map it to name last. And you see that the issue is resolved. This particular error is composed of two issues. The first issue is, within a given feature, you cannot have two columns mapped to the same attribute. So if you look, you see that both of these columns are mapped to name last on the name feature. The way to solve this issue is to go in and actually apply the correct attribute of name first and save it. And now you see that we have one name feature with all of its attributes correctly mapped. Let's say you have a situation where your data source includes two addresses that you'd like to use for entity resolution. Senzing has already auto-mapped the first address for you. Now you would like to include the second address. First, you'll need to label the first address, which is already mapped. You'll see the state changes as you work your way through your labels. This is just Senzing warning you and providing you best practices, which are actually here in guidance. Go ahead and click Save. So now we're correctly mapped. Green is good. Now we'd like to include our second address. So first, we'll include the columns which contain the data that build up our second address feature. Now we'll map each two attributes within address. And now we're going to apply a different label than we're using for our other address so that these two address features can be kept distinct. So let's call this mailing. Right, and let's work our way through. All set. So let's review. We have two address features in our data source, which we have both included for entity resolution. We have mapped each of the attributes within the feature appropriately and then used labels to keep the two features distinct. If you have data in your data sources that you would like to include to have on your entities once they've been resolved, but don't want to use that data for entity resolution itself, you can select Included and Map to None and Map to No feature, and go ahead and click Save. Now you've got a solid foundation and are on your way to mapping mastery. Be sure to check out more articles and tutorials on our Knowledge Center.